The following program is intended for mature audiences.
Welcome to Rudy's Revelation, Sunday, March 7th, 2021. Today I'll be talking about the Ides of March as it relates to basic astrology, numerology, and prognostication. I'll also be talking back to the Sunday Talking Heads on CBS Face the Nation, where Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, speaks out about attempting to vaccinate everyone, including children, by this fall. I'll also be checking in on our Sunday morning propaganda at our favorite feel-good feature news program, CBS Sunday Morning, where there were segments attempting to link Oath Keepers to militant extremism. They also aired Chinese propaganda, where they openly deny any responsibility for the coronavirus outbreak and reiterated their denial that the virus was not man-made in the Wuhan laboratory. But we'll be focusing on a segment where correspondent David Pogue helps rationalize the use of CRISPR, which undoubtedly had a hand in gain-of-function research of pathogens, as well as possibly in the manufacturing of the coronavirus. We'll also be tearing into the Sunday New York Times, showing how the newspaper continually mischaracterizes the facts to mislead the public. Of course, I'll be going over the weekend headlines all in the next 30 minutes. But first, I'll be taking you back to school, giving you some historical context to frame this week's news narratives. The word of the day is Ides.
He 15th day of March, May, July, or October, or the 13th day of any other month in the ancient Roman calendar.
And of course, we're talking about the Ides of March. The Romans did not number each day of the month from the first to the last. Instead, they counted back from the three fixed points of the month: the nonus, the 5th of the 7th, the Ides, the 13th for the most month of the 15th of March, May, July, and October, and the calends, the first of the following month. Originally, the Ides were supposed to be determined by the full moon, reflecting the lunar origin of the Roman calendar, and the earliest calendar of the Ides of March would have been the first moon of the new year. Now, people don't understand this, but most of the elite all follow astrology in terms of its prognostication. Now, the Romans had religious observances around the Ides of March. The Ides of each month were sacred to Jupiter, the Roman supreme deity. The Flamus Dialis, Jupiter's high priest, led the Ides sheep in the procession along the Via Sacra to the arks where it was sacrificed. In addition to the monthly sacrifice, the Ides of March were also the occasion of the feast of Anna Perenna, the goddess of the year, whose festival originally concluded the ceremonies of the new year. The day was enthusiastically celebrated among the common people with picnics, drinking, and revelry. One source from late antiquity also places the Mammalia on the Ides of March. This observance, which had aspects of scapegoat or ancient Greek pharmakos ritual, involved beating an old man dressed in animal skins and perhaps driving him from the city. The ritual may have been a New Year festival representing the expulsion of the old year. From astrology, the day in the Roman calendar of the 7 days before it, it appears that the term applied to the day in which the sun passed the points of equinoxes of the tropics, and the 7 days constituted the orbs preceding the sun's crossing of the cusps of the four cardinal signs, or angular houses. Shakespeare refers to the baleful influence of the Ides of March, evidently the last 7 degrees of Pisces, or the 12th house. Now, the elites always refer to astrology, like I said, as prognostication, the moving of the planets, and their influence on human lives. From astrology, Ganesh astrology, beware the Ides of Mars. The first week of March represents a rare combination of transits that are rarely seen in the sky. The first week of the March will represent 4 stationary planets in a transition of changing directions. Mercury slows to a stop on the February 27th and goes direct on the 28th. Mars comes to the stop on February 28th and commences retrograde on March 1st. Saturn becomes stationary on March 1st and begins its retrogression on March 2nd. And Jupiter begins to station and direct on March 5th. The general themes ascribed to the planets that are stationary in Vedic astrology are effects that are crooked, bent, and curved, curled, dishonest, perverse, and fraudulent. There's an old astrological maxim that many astrologies are leery of during these times like these. When Saturn and Mars conjoin, there will be war. From National Today, beware the Ides of March, or at least beware the Ides. Even takes place March 15th. The word Ides is derived from the Latin word Ides, which refers to the middle of the month in the Roman calendar. The Ides were the designated day, and this is important, folks, for settling debts each month in the Roman Empire, and generally included the 7 days preceding the Ides for this purpose. No debtors who could not pay their debts were considered the Ides to be unlucky days, as they were typically thrown into prison or forced into slavery. So basically what I'm trying to get across here, folks, is the Ides of March are the last days in which debts can be settled. And so people that have debts to be paid, moral or otherwise, need to have those debts done by the Ides. So most people who are in debt will hide low until after the 15th, after they will come out. Now, the Smithsonian has a bunch of different stuff here. Top 10 reasons why to beware the Ides of March. They obviously have the assassination of Julius Caesar, a raid on southern England in 1360, Samoan Cyclone, 1889, Tsar Nicholas abdicates his throne, 1917, Germany occupies Czechoslovakia, None of these have to do anything with debt, and that's what I want people to concentrate on, is that in numerology and astrology, and the way the Romans believed, is that your debts need to be paid, or your vengeance needs to be taken out before the 15th. Otherwise, you're free and clear. So the people in debt or have some sort of debt, moral or financial, stay in hiding till after the 15th. What are the Ides anyway? Why did Caesar have to die? There was said to be several plots to kill Caesar, and for a multitude of reasons. According to Suetonius, the Sibyllian oracle had declared that Parthia could only be conquered by a Roman king, and that the Roman consul Marcus Aurelius Cotta was planning to call for Caesar to be named king in mid-March. The senators feared Caesar's power, that he might overthrow the Senate in favor of general tyranny. Brutus and Cassius, the main conspirators in the plot to kill Caesar, were magistrates of the Senate, and as they would not be allowed to either oppose the crowning of Caesar nor remain silent, they had to kill him. Now they talk about here this Sibyllian oracle, and I want to get into Sibyl just a little bit. In Rome, Sibyl became known as the Magna Mater, the great mother of the Roman state, adopted and developed a particular form of cult after the Sibyllian oracle in 205 BC recommended her conscription as the key religious ally in Rome's second war against Carthage. Roman mythiographers reinvented her as the Trojan goddess, and thus an ancestral goddess of the Roman people by the way of the Trojan Prince Aeneas, as Rome eventually established hegemony over the Mediterranean world. Romanized forms of Sibyl's cult spread throughout Roman Empire. Greek and Roman writers debated and disputed the meaning and morality of her cults and priesthood, which remained controversial subjects in Roman history. But now we're going to go into the reading recommendations of the week.
Less than 3% of you people read books.
And our first one up is Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, the Coming Great Deception, and the Luciferian Endgame. One myth from history of every great civilization spoke of the beings descending from heaven and using animal and human DNA to create giant offspring. Rabbinical authorities, subsequent translators, and early church fathers understood this as factual record of history. The phenomenon began with the Watchers who spawned Nephilim, resulting in judgment from God. The ancients also knew Bible passages that predict the Nephilim will return when Iraq and Iran are invaded and destroyed. Is this a prophecy about to be fulfilled? Is man in his rush to play God throughout biological weapons, biotechnology, and genetic manipulation, opening gateways to a supernatural unknown Nephilim stargates, and the return of the Watchers is a glimpse into this past, present, and future phenomenon with an eye on what sages and scientists believe, what futurists and prophets may fear. And then 1600 Trump Avenue, Against All Odds, a Political Prophecy. Master storyteller Les Pendleton creates a riveting prophecy of Donald Trump's first days as president of the United States. An angry America elected Donald Trump president. He vowed to do what no American president in modern history seemed to be capable of, to unite the country and make it great again. From the moment he took office, the United States would be playing by new rules that put America interests first. Just hours into his presidency, he is told that although elected president, he would not be in charge of anything. It would take much more than his money, power, and charisma to wrestle control for those who are actually in charge. Did Donald possess the innate abilities and instinctive courage needed to undertake an epic transformation in a government that had been grossly manipulated from being of the people? The battle lines were drawn for an intense showdown that would reshape American history. Both sides severely underestimated the enemy they would be facing, the control of the country. You will discover your worst fears about the government are real. And that's a little bit about prophecy and the fact that the elites still use astrology and superstition to guide their decisions. So the reason I bring up Ides of March now, it's not the Ides of March, because within this week, you need to see what happens before the debts are closed. We're going to get into the headlines from Fox News. This is from earlier in the week. House Democrats pass extensive voting and campaign finance reform bill, H.R. 1. From AP, highlights of the $1.9 trillion COVID bill nearing final passage. The Senate approved the sweeping pandemic relief package over Republican opposition on Saturday, moving President Joe Biden closer to a milestone political victory that would provide $1,400 checks for most Americans and direct billions of dollars into schools, state and local governments, and businesses. Basically, anybody who's read the bill will tell you that this is a payoff for failing Democratic states, and that most of the money does not go to direct payouts to Americans, American citizens. The bill cleared by a party line vote of 50-49 after a marathon overnight voting session, and now heads back to the House for final passage, which could come early next week. The facts about H.R. 1, the For the People Act of 2019. Federalizes and micromanages the election process administered by the states, imposes unnecessary, unwise, and unconstitutional mandates on the states. These are part of the key takeaways. Number 2, the bill interferes with the ability of states and their citizens to determine qualifications for voters and to ensure the accuracy of voter registration rolls. H.R. 1 reverses the decentralization of the American election process, which is necessary for protecting our liberty and freedom. I believe that's from the Heritage Institute. For the People Act. This is from Wikipedia. The For the People Act, known as H.R. 1, is a bill first introduced and passed in the United States House of Representatives in 2019 to expand voting rights, change campaign finance laws to reduce influence of money in politics. limit partisan gerrymandering, and create new ethics rules for federal office holders. Basically, what H.R. 1 does is ensure one-party rule by the Democrats by basically legitimizing fraud. John Urbanus, sponsor, representative of Maryland's 3rd Congressional District, is a Democrat. The bill passed the House on March 3rd, 2021, and goes to the Senate for next consideration. The bill is scheduled for the following committee meetings, March 10th, 2021 at 10 a.m. Moving right along, this is from Bloomberg. Hyperinflation pushes Venezuela to print 1 million Bolivar bills. Venezuela said it will introduce a new large denomination Bolivar note as hyperinflation renders most bills worthless, forcing citizens to turn to the U.S. dollar for everyday transactions. Thank you, communism. And we're not long in the tooth for that either here with these kind of spending bills. From the Daily Mail, Trump supporters clashed with Antifa in Manhattan after unfurling a huge flag of Pelosi as a demon outside Trump Tower. Basically what happened here is it was a Trump supporter march, and of course they were met by Antifa, and a lot of Antifa and Black Lives Matter counter-protesters were arrested for causing violence. But that's not actually mentioned in any of these articles. But it does make it clear that most of the people arrested were counter-protesters who caused violence. From the AP, this article by Sarah Klein, as violence surges, some question Portland axing police unit. Responding to calls for change in policing, the mayor and city council cut several police programs from the budget, including a specialized unit focused on curbing gun violence, which had long faced criticism from disproportionately targeting people of color. It was disbanded a month before Penny, a 27-year-old black man visiting from Sacramento, California, was killed on July 25th. Well, obviously, violence will surge after you defund police. Why is that surprising? It's from the New York Times. Biden to sign order meant to make voting easier. President Biden is expected to sign an executive order on Sunday, which is today, that directs the government to take steps to make voting easier, marking the 56th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday March in Selma, Alabama, which swiftly turned voting rights into a national cause. Don't forget this from the New York Times. Multi-part orders aimed at using the far-flung reach of the federal agencies to help people register to vote and to encourage Americans to go to the polls on Election Day. In a prepared speech from the Martin and Coretta King Unity Breakfast on Sunday, Mr. Biden will argue that such actions are still necessary despite the progress of the last half century. From the Wall Street Journal, Russia disinformation campaign aims to undermine confidence in Pfizer other COVID-19 vaccine, the U.S. officials say. Websites linked to Russian intelligence services publish false information questioning vaccines' safety and efficacy. Well, I don't think you really need Russian intelligence to tell you that there are some safety concerns and efficacy concerns if you look at the documentation surrounding vaccines, particularly these vaccines. Russian intelligence agencies have mounted a campaign to undermine confidence in Pfizer and other Western vaccines. Not in the China vaccine. The website played up vaccines' risks and side effects, questioned their efficacy, and the U.S. had rushed the Pfizer vaccine through the approval process, among other false or misleading claims. The U.S. didn't rush the Pfizer vaccine through approval process? Wasn't it emergency approval? That's why I nixed my subscription to the Wall Street Journal. Pfizer plant boosting vaccines has repeat quality offenses. The factory that Pfizer Incorporated plans to use to boost production of its COVID-19 vaccine for the massive U.S. inoculation effort was cited by federal inspectors last year for repeated quality control violations. Is that Russian disinformation? From Fox News New York testing COVID passport. With limited resumption of sporting events at venues in New York, Madison Square Garden and Barclays Center will be used as testing grounds for a new digital pass that could confirm the owner's COVID status. It will confirm an individual's vaccine or recent negative coronavirus test. First tested at the Brooklyn Nets game at Barclays Center on February 27th, the Excelsior Pass created with IBM, well, that's reassuring, was tested for a second time during the New York Rangers game Tuesday at Madison Square Garden. From AP, 6 Dr. Seuss books won't be published for racist images. 6 Dr. Seuss books, including And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street and If I Ran the Zoo, will stop being published because of racist and insensitive imagery, the business that preserves and protects the author's legacy said Tuesday. These books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong, says Dr. Seuss Enterprises. Other books affected are McElliot's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. The decision to cease publication and sales of the books was made last year after months of discussion. It's more modern book burning. Who cares what's in the book? If you don't like what's in the book, don't buy it. If you don't like what's on TV or on the internet, you don't have to look at it. It's called freedom of choice. From U.S. News and World Report, FBI Director Wray, no apparent Antifa involvement in January 6th attack. Those who have been arrested for their involvement in the deadly melee so far are white supremacists and members of far-right extremist groups, the Director Wray told Congress. First of all, that's not true. We know that John Sullivan or Jaden X was there, that he's a BLM activist and Antifa person, a black bloc. I've seen video of him dressing up in all black with his AR-15. This guy was obviously there filming and an instigator. And we saw in many pieces of video that there were people there that were obviously instigators. Goes on to say the FBI has found no evidence so far that far-left groups such as Antifa participated in the violent mob of President Donald Trump supporters who attacked the U.S. Capitol, despite persistent conspiracy theories. You have to look at the video and you see it yourself. The people that were breaking windows and causing violence for the most part were young Antifa members, not Trump supporters. There was even video of Antifa behind a tree dressing up in Trump gear. From CNBC, U.S. is not prepared to defend or compete in the AI era, says expert group chaired by Eric Schmidt, who was a former head of Google. It also urges President Biden to reject calls for a global ban on highly controversial AI-powered autonomous weapons, saying that China and Russia are unlikely to keep to any treaty they sign. Well, we know we've given most of our AI technology, and Google has given most of our AI technology to China. Chinese vaccines swept much of the world despite concerns. The plane laden with vaccines had just rolled to a stop in San Diego's airport in late January, and Chile's president, Sebastian Pinera, was beaming. Today, he said, is a day of joy, emotion, and hope. The source of that hope, China, a country that Chile and dozens of other nations are depending on to help rescue them from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not your salvation, it's your slavery. From the Charlotte Observer, morally compromised, why one archdiocese urges Catholics to avoid newest COVID vaccine. The Archdiocese of New Orleans had advised Catholics against receiving the new Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine, calling the one-dose shot morally compromised. In a statement Friday, the religious organization said that the new vaccine should be avoided due to its link to abortion-derived cell line, which is true. These are cloned cells from an abortion, I think, that took place in 1967, 37, not sure on the date. But those concerns are true. It's not the actual cells from the fetus, but they are cloned cells. From the Daily Mail, A third of all military personnel are refusing to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, with alarm commanders aiming to make the shot mandatory as soon as possible. There are a lot of people that are wary of this vaccine. Dona Ana County detention officer sues over COVID-19 vaccine mandate. A Dona Ana County detention center officer facing termination for declining a COVID-19 vaccination is suing county manager Fernando Macias and detention center officials over the mandate. It is unconstitutional because the vaccine is under emergency authorization because it's experimental, and you cannot mandate people to take an experimental vaccine, which is the same reason the people in the military that get mandated vaccines all the time and injections aren't forced to take this vaccine. So it's really up to the peer pressure. From the Los Angeles Times, scientists get serious about mixing and matching COVID-19 vaccines. A lot of us have engaged in some bold mixing and matching during the pandemic. Office attire on top, pajama pants on bottom, for instance, and been none the worse for it. Imagine doing the same for COVID-19 vaccines, perhaps pairing a first dose of the AstraZeneca product with a second dose supplied by Novavax. Will the consequences of such mixing be any graver? 2 vaccines are currently being rolled out across the United States, a third expected to join them in a week, or 2 more likely to come over the next several months. All but one were designed to be delivered as 2-dose regimens. Nobody knows what the outcome and effects over time will be from these vaccinations. That's why people are leery. This is a experimental vaccine with new technology being employed. China said to speed up move to more survivable nuclear force. They're ready for war. China appears to be moving faster toward the capability to launch its own newer nuclear missiles from underground silos, possibly to improve its ability to respond promptly to a nuclear attack, according to an American expert who analyzed satellite images of recent construction at a missile training area. Imagery suggests that China is seeking to counter what it may view as a growing threat from the United States. The U.S. in recent years has pointed to China's nuclear modernization as a key justification for investing hundreds of billions of dollars in the coming 2 decades to build all new nuclear arsenal. Well, there's certainly something to be concerned about. Turn to the New York Times, the Sunday New York Times today. How one firm put an extraordinary burden on the U.S.'s troubled stockpile. A shortage of life-saving medical equipment last year was a searing example of the government's failed coronavirus response as healthcare workers resorted to wearing trash bags. One Maryland company profited by selling anthrax vaccines to the country's emergency reserve. An investigation by the New York Times found a hidden explanation. Government purchases of strategic national stockpile, the country's emergency medical reserve, where such equipment is kept, have largely been driven by the demands and financial interests of a handful of biotech firms that have specialized in products that address terrorist threats rather than infectious disease. Chief among them is Emergent Biosolutions, a Maryland-based company now manufacturing COVID-19 vaccines for AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. Last year, as a pandemic raced across the country, the government paid Emergent $626 million for products that included vaccines to fight an entirely different threat, a terrorist attack using anthrax. Well, see, the thing about anthrax is it's undying and could live out in the air indefinitely, unlike the present threat of a virus that will die soon after leaving its host. So it basically has to go from host to new host. So it's not really that much of a threat. Now, I don't agree with all the stockpiling, and so they're fighting against a terrorist attack like anthrax, which is deadly, versus coronavirus, which is not really deadly. So I just wanted to put this out there as a red herring. The New York Times is pointing towards fighting against a really deadly pathogen like anthrax versus something engineered for low-scale culling like the coronavirus. From the business section, the robots are coming for fill and accounting. Workers with college degrees and specialized training once felt relatively safe from automation. They aren't. It's an article from Kevin Roos. The robots are coming not to kill you with lasers or beat you in chess or even to ferry you around town in a driverless Uber. These robots are here to merge purchase orders into columns J and K and next quarter's revenue forecast and transfer customer data from the invoicing software to the Oracle database. They are unassuming software programs with the names like Auxilio Bits, data table to JSON string, and they are becoming the star employee of many American companies. The robots are coming in various forms, some in software, some in actual robots. They're coming to destabilize the job market on purpose. As we turn to the New York Times, we always leave you in the Sunday Review the week in opinion and editorial pieces. But the one we're going to concentrate on is we expect 300,000 fewer births than usual this year. Signs are pointing to a sizable pandemic baby bust in the United States with implications that will be with us for years to come. It's an article by Melissa S. Kearney and Philip B. Levine. And so they blame, even though we've seen article after article of declining sperm counts and declining fertility, they're going to blame it all on the pandemic. Their lead says the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown the country into an economic recession and unprecedented restructuring of our work and social lives. Early on, some likened the public health crisis to a blizzard, imagining that people would stay home, cozy up with their romantic partners, and make babies. These playful visions have given way to a more sobering reality. The pandemic's serious disruption in people's lives is likely to cause missing births, potentially a lot of them. Add these missing births to the country's decade-long downward trend in annual births, and we can expect consequential changes to our economy and society in the years to come. Unfortunately, these are no easy fixes. Indeed, the fact of the matter is that there's a war on births. There's a war on having children, particularly in Western countries, particularly in this countries, we're bathed in hormone disruptors that are really declining the birth rate. And so in this opinion piece, they're trying to attribute the declining birth rate to COVID, when certainly it does contribute. You know what else contributed? The Zika scare of a year or two ago, where they told people, oh, if you have babies during the Zika scare, that they might expect birth defects. So they've done everything they can to keep people from having babies, chemically and otherwise, and through propaganda. And this is just another rationalization that somehow it's just from COVID or the lockdowns or something. That's just not the case. So we're going to leave you, obviously, with the talking heads. I'm going to start with Dr. Anthony Fauci, who tells us that now the vaccines, now that most of the adults will be vaccinated by March, they're going to start rolling out vaccines for the young people. And there still are some questions of effects on fertility. And this is where the problem really starts. There's no evidence that the virus is spreading among young people, but they want to vaccinate them anyway with unproven, untested. It's really a genetic, it's not really a therapy. It's a genetic modification drug injection. So let's hear from St. Fauci.
Now, what about high school students? Should they be vaccinated before the fall? Enough vaccines to vaccinate everyone.
Respiratory viruses do better in the sense of better for the community in the sum of, but we can't rely on that now. What we need to rely on is getting people vaccinating.
Enough vaccines to vaccinate everyone.
And continuing the public health measures with the gradual pulling back. We want to make sure people understand this is not going to be indefinite. We need to gradually pull back as we get more people vaccinated.
And that is happening every single day, more and more people, and particularly as we get more doses, which are going to be dramatically increased as we get into April and May. And as the President has said, we will have, and by the end of May,
enough vaccines to vaccinate everyone.
We'll have to put a big push to get it into people's arms. But by that time, we're going to be doing much, much better. We're going to have community vaccine centers, vaccine in pharmacies. Okay, sorry.
Now, what about high school students? Should they be vaccinated before the fall?
Well, actually, that's a very good
question. And right now, the
tests are being done to determine both safety and comparable immunogenicity in high school students. We project that high school students will very likely be able to be vaccinated by the fall term. Maybe not the very first day, but certainly in the early part of the fall for that fall educational term. Elementary school kids were doing this what's called age de-escalation studies to make sure it's safe and immunogenic, and then they likely will be able to get vaccinated by the very first quarter of 2022.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Fauci.
And then, of course, we're going to leave you with David Pogue, who helps rationalize the use of CRISPR, which undoubtedly had a hand in gain-of-function research of pathogens. It's basically the way they easily genetically modify things. And it probably very well had something to do with the manufacturing of the coronavirus. At Chapel Hill in 2015 in North Carolina, and in the Wuhan laboratory subsequently after September, probably even before September 2019.
clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeat.
CRISPR, a long and complicated acronym.
Gene editing technique known as CRISPR.
The Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to 2 women.
When Jennifer Doudna won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry last year,
I have the real medal stashed away in a safe.
Doudna is a biochemist at the University of California at Berkeley. She and her collaborator, Emmanuel Charpentier, won the Nobel for their 2012 work on a scientific breakthrough that's frequently described with words like miraculous, the gene editing technique known as CRISPR.
Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeat.
CRISPR, a long and complicated acronym. So it's an acronym that stands for Clustered, Regularly Interspaced, Short Palindromic Repeats. Don't ask me to say that again.
Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats.
I knew it. That's what I would have guessed. What does it look like in the real world? Is it a computer? Is it software?
It's not a computer and it's not software. It's if you were looking at it in my lab, you would see a tube of colorless liquid.
Ha 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 ha.
2 tubes, actually. The first contains molecules that have been engineered to latch onto one particular gene in the cells of a living thing, a specific part of its DNA. The proteins in the other liquid cut the DNA at that spot.
It's like a zip code that you can address to find a particular place in the DNA of a cell and literally like scissors make a snip.
Cutting DNA like this usually disables the gene. We can disable a gene that gives us a disease, or shut off the gene that limits how much fur cashmere goats grow, or how much muscle a beagle grows. The next step is much harder. Swapping in a different DNA sequence, replacing it with something we've created ourselves. We'll be able to rewrite the genes of any plant, animal, or person.
biotechnology and CRISPR. It's the most amazing thing happening in our time.
Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeat.
Since Doudna published her paper in 2012, a lot's been going on in the world's CRISPR labs. Scientists have bred more nutritious tomatoes and created a wheat that doesn't contain gluten. Clinical trials are underway to treat some cancers using CRISPR techniques. About 7,000 human diseases are caused by gene mutations, including Victoria Gray, a Mississippi mother of 4 who became the first American to be treated with CRISPR-fixed genes. Of course, like any revolutionary technology, this one has a dark side.
The headlines are always about, oh, what you've unleashed is designer babies. Like, people are going to say, I want blonde, blue-haired, super smart, super muscular. Is that real?
Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeat.
Well, yes and no. I don't think we're on the verge of a world of CRISPR babies myself. But it's close enough in the sense that the technology fundamentally could enable this, that I think it's critical that we have a discussion about it.
There's also a difference between editing one person's genes, like Victoria Gray's, and making changes that will be passed on to their children.
The girls are safe, healthy as any other babies.
In 2018, a Chinese doctor edited the embryos of 3 Chinese babies so that they and their descendants would be resistant to the HIV virus.
I think we still need to understand the motivation for the study and what the process was for informed consent.
Scientists worldwide condemned him for going rogue.
In China, at first, for about a day, he was celebrated as the first person to create designer babies.
Imagine having CRISPR-based devices so that people can come to work, spit in a tube, and in 30 minutes get an answer telling them whether they need to be quarantined or not.
Oh, I think the biotech revolution is going to be 10 times more important than the digital revolution because it allows us to hack the code of life. And we shouldn't be afraid of using this technology.
Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeat.
Because it allows us to hack the code of life.
That's it for us. See you next week. Sunday is Rudy's Revelation. Check us out on Twitter and Facebook. See you next week.